Hello there. Today I'm looking at a wine from Saint Estephe. This is Chateau Laffitte Carcasset 2018. It's a Cru Bourgeois Superieur. So those of you who've been following my channel may be slightly surprised to see me recording this video in New Zealand, as the previous two I recorded at the chateau in Saint Estephe. If you saw the lineup of wines that I was tasting through, which is published as one of the shorts on the channel, you might have noted that one of the wines, the 2018, its place in the lineup was taken by a glass of wine. That was because the tasting sample that I'd had was a sample that had been taken from a Vinotech machine. Now, at the time that I tried it, I wasn't completely sure that the sample was exactly correct. It was really quite particular, it was quite firm, it was quite savoury, and the fruit was a little restrained. And I wasn't sure that the sample was completely healthy. So I thought I would take an opportunity to try the 2018 again from bottle. So here we are. It also gives me a chance to give a little more of the background to Chateau Laffitte Carcasset that I should probably have put in the earlier recordings, just to remind you this is the third of 7 vintages of Laffitte Carcasset that I'm looking at in this flight. So we're located here pretty much in the heart of Saint-Emilion. We're actually slightly inland from Tronquoy-le-Land, slightly to the south of Chateau de Pez, and most of the vineyard sits around the chateau itself on some gravelly soils, and this combination of the gravel plateau and the relatively warm climate that you have here at the north of the Médoc, where the appellations are slightly closer to the sea, where the influence of the sea helps to moderate the climate. It warms it when it's cool and cools it when it's warm. So this combination produces some ideal conditions for the growing and ripening both the Cabernet Sauvignon and of Merlot. They reckon there's a lovely aromatic expression from the grapes, and also that this is a good expression of the typicity of the wines of Saint Estephe. So the first records of the chateau that is now Laffitte Carcasset come from 1759, and the location of the estate is recorded as being La Carcasset. In 1781, the estate was purchased by somebody called Jean Laffitte, and he was a court lawyer and a king's prosecutor from Bordeaux, and as was traditional at this stage, he added his name to his estate, so this became Chateau Laffitte. And actually the wines from the estate were labelled as Chateau Laffitte Saint Estephe for a long period. I've seen labels with that nomenclature from the 1920s. Now, despite the fact that the Laffitte family sold the estate in 1838, it retained the Laffitte name, and in 1898 it came to be named Laffitte Carcasset. Now, between 1838 and its most recent purchase in 2016, the estate has been owned by 4 different families. The most recent purchase was by somebody called Pierre Rousseau, and Pierre made his fortune through the production and sale of motorhomes. And since 2016, he has invested heavily in renovating and improving the winery, the chateau itself, and the vineyards here at Laffitte Carcasset. One of his first moves in 2016 was to employ Hubert de Boüard and his consultancy to advise on the production of the wines here. And clearly that's been very successful, as Laffitte Carcasset is recognised as a Cru Bourgeois Superieur, classification that was confirmed in 2020. So as I say, the appellation is Saint Estephe. The size of the property's vineyards is about 35 hectares. And just a little more on the soil, it's a Garonne gravel, so friable gravel over a subsoil of clayey limestone. So you have this combination of free draining gravel and the water retaining combination of clay and limestone. The varieties planted in the vineyard are 60% of Cabernet Sauvignon with 35% of Merlot and 5% of Cabernet Franc. And the average vine age here is a very creditable 30 years, so some good mature vines here. They refer to the 2018 vintage as having been sunny but demanding. There was a mild but really quite rainy spring, and the humidity meant that the spring was marked by quite strong mildew pressure. However, there was sufficient sunshine to see the fruit through to good maturity, and actually here the vines benefited from the water holding capacity of the clayey limestone subsoils. So the fruit was harvested with both ripe tannins and good ripe aromatics. The blend in 2018 at Laffitte Carcasset was 50% of Cabernet Sauvignon with 47% of Merlot and 3% of Cabernet Franc. A portion of the picking at Laffitte Carcasset is done by machine and the rest is done by hand. Picking started on the 17th of September and was completed by the 10th of October. Now vinification went on in stainless steel tanks. They were aiming for a slow and gentle extraction. In 2018, this is prior to the renovation of the cellars, so these are the old stainless steel tanks. Those have now been replaced by a mixture of modern conical stainless steel tanks and cement tanks. The wine then aged in French oak barrels, so 225 litre Bordeaux barriques, for a period of 12 months, and 40% of those barrels were new in 2018. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we, and see how we get on with tasting it from a full bottle. Looking at the colour, it's quite paradoxical to see that the wine both has a sort of a slight purple hue as I swirl it, but also some mellowing ruby red colour as well. Its pigmentation is dark, but not particularly deep. I can see through the wine fairly easily. There's a nice vibrancy. According to its label, the wine has 14% alcohol, and not surprisingly, it's throwing some quite bold tears onto the glass there. This is clearly quite a dense, rich wine. So let's see what I make of the aroma, shall we? And this was where I started to have some difficulties with the sample I tried at the estate. So let's see how we get on here. Gosh, I can see why I struggled with this. There are some really nice, fresh, sort of crisp red plum notes coming through, but those are overlaid by some quite powerful savoury, umami, meaty notes. And actually, the more I look at them, the more I think they're sort of mushroomy notes. So the wine is showing quite a lot of development quite early on. It's quite powerful, there's a nice density to that fruit. And there are actually some delicate black fruit top notes, sort of hints of cassis, maybe slightly weedy cassis. They're just providing a sort of quite a piquant freshness to the top notes of the nose there. So let's have a taste. Now I've had this wine open for about an hour, and I was hoping it might have opened up a little bit more, but this is really quite tight, quite dense, quite meaty. I think the oak is having quite an influence on quite powerful fruit. There's an underlying fine cedary tannic note running right the way through this, some fine powdery tannins there. They're not particularly harsh or drying, but they are really rather closing up the really quite juicy fruit. There's an almost sort of meaty smoothness there. There's a roundness that's been contributed by the alcohol, but it's not particularly hot. I think the weight of the fruit and the slightly drying, powdery nature of the tannins is just stopping that from showing. And in some ways, it's making those more sort of savoury, meaty notes that little bit more obvious. Again, in some ways, though, it's paradoxical. The nose was showing some quite developed, mushroomy notes. Here, the fruit actually still seems to be quite closed up. Still, I think, needs time in bottle to open and express itself. I will be interested to see how this develops in the glass over the next couple of hours. I certainly think the quite powerful structure is really best suited to accompanying food. And in terms of when to drink, I would suggest that this probably wants to be left for at least another couple of years in the hope that it will smooth out a little bit more and come past its oak and show some more of the delicate, fresh, lively perfume that was noticeable on the nose. Now the wine is full-bodied. It has reasonable acidity. As I said, there's a freshness of some plummy fruit notes and there are some hints of cassis. But maybe given the wine's weight and its rich alcohol, it would have helped from having slightly fresher, more lively acidity. In terms of aging the wine, once it comes past its structure and the powderiness of those fine tannins, I think this is a wine you could probably quite happily keep for another 5, 6, 7, probably 8 to 10 years. I really don't think there's any huge hurry to drink this up. And if you're drinking it relatively young, I think pairing it with dishes with plenty of fat, protein, would help to show off the wine's intense fruit and structure. So in terms of the wine's quality, I took a look at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score, and given the fact that this is seen to be quite a good vintage, I was a little surprised to see it only gets 89 out of 100. Having tasted it again, the wine is awkward. I think it still needs to find its balance between its structure and its fruit. So I think actually at the moment, 89 out of 100 is probably a fair score. However, I think the wine's density, its intensity, and the fact that it has reasonable balance could well lead it to open and to provide some drinking that exceeds that rating in the future. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this tasting, and I hope you're enjoying the flight of wines from Chateau Laffitte Carcasset. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available near you, and if so, at what price. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, I'd really appreciate it if you consider sharing it with them. That would be a great help for me. And if you have any comments or questions, do pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at and the tastings I'm doing. Do keep an eye on the next videos I'm producing, because I have several more vintages of Laffitte Carcasset to look at. I really do think this is a lovely opportunity to see these wines alongside each other. So thank you again, and I hope we'll see you soon for another tasting. Till then, bye for now.